From the world's most powerful rocket bursting up in flames to having a horrible, horrible launch system that can devastate everything around it, here's what really happened in the recent SpaceX launch. So folks, the launch didn't go as well as anyone expected it to go. In other words, there was a boom. Yep, you heard that right. SpaceX's Starship rocket cleared its launch platform. However, it couldn't separate itself from its booster. So what happened? Well, it exploded just 4 minutes after lifting off. And the reason why this is a little upsetting is because it was an inaugural test flight. So now, it's going to take a while before we can have the Starship back in the air again. But the good news is it was unmanned, so that's a major relief. The Starship is supposed to be our ticket to Mars. Because here's the thing, it's a fully reusable transportation system that's been designed to carry cargo and crew out of the Earth's orbit. It can go to Mars and beyond. After all, it's the world's most powerful launch rocket ever. And guess what? It can carry up to 150 tons of people and things. That's 330,693 pounds of goods. That's crazy. Guess we better start packing, huh? Not so fast. Didn't you hear me when I said it exploded? So this trip that it was on was supposed to be a 90-minute trip around the Earth. But nope, it got complicated because it splashed down near Hawaii. Once the rocket reached max Q, which is the maximum dynamic pressure of the rocket, it began to tumble tail over the nose. At that time, it was 18 miles in the air. A minute after that, it started to fall before completely combusting. The launch was streamed live, and it showed that some of the 33 engines in the booster just weren't firing. SpaceX's principal integration engineer, John Insprucker, stated, "Starship just experienced what we call a rapid, unscheduled disassembly." He also added, "As we expected, excitement is guaranteed. Starship gave us a spectacular end to what was a relatively successful test flight so far. Yet, it's not all bad news. If you saw the live stream, you'd notice that SpaceX staff still cheered, even though the Starship was burning. Because you see, folks, it's still a pretty big deal. I mean, successfully lifting a super tall rocket, 400 feet or 120 meters to be exact, off the launch step is still an important step. SpaceX's main goal is to act as a transporter of humans and goods between Earth and Mars. So this was still a big step towards that goal. In a tweet, the company stated that success comes from what we learn. It also mentioned how this will help them improve the rocket's reliability, which will be crucial for multiplanetary life. Now, there was some aftermath. Debris fell somewhere in the Gulf of Mexico, and the company will now work with local authorities to recover everything. According to SpaceX CEO and owner Elon Musk, the team will be testing its rocket again in just a few months. And what's more, this launch impressed NASA too. Bill Nelson, an administrator at NASA, has stated that he's already kinda excited to see what the next launch could bring. That while of course there's a risk, every great achievement in history has had its risks. In fact, he even claimed that with great risk comes great reward. The thing is, NASA does want the Starship rocket to succeed, because it's paying SpaceX to develop a reusable moon shuttle. But the sad bit is, this mission is quite a few years away. Now, let's talk about the rocket for a second. So, the reason why it can launch multiple times is because of its powerful engine design called Raptor. But there's a problem with that too. You see, this rocket uses 33 booster engines. That's more than any rocket ever made. And according to the director of MIT's Space Propulsion Laboratory, Paul Lozano, this seems to be a trade-off. While something like this is super important for lifting heavy payloads, the drawback is that having so many engines firing off at the same time is a challenge. You've got to consider their size, the heat that they produce, and a bunch of other things too. One of the challenges is the choice of fuel. Methane. You see, SpaceX wants to experiment with methane because, well, it's cheaper and it's safer than hydrogen. On top of that, it's easier to handle. But it does add complications too. Ready for a small science lesson? So, to use methane, the rocket's oxidizer, oxygen, needs to be super cold. And that's exactly why 4 days before the launch, a valve in the rocket froze. But hey, considering just how important this test launch was, it makes sense that SpaceX went in knowing it'll be risky. The thing about the company is, they design everything based on failure. The company deliberately pushes its hardware to the limit, blowing things up at times, to learn anything that it can from that. This basically means that, SpaceX's Starship is going to be a massive deal in the future. And that's exactly what they expect will bring them most of their money. Right now, the company's only source of revenue is the Falcon 9 rocket that's used to launch Starlink satellites into orbit. And while the Falcon 9 can send a few dozen at a time, Starship will be able to send several hundred of them per launch. On top of that, the booster used for this was an older one. But there's a new one that's being developed, and it's going to have a better chance at a successful flight. However, no matter how exciting the road to Mars may seem to be right now, let's not forget it comes with heavy costs. You see, the SpaceX launch was terrible for the environment. I mean, the massive force of the launch sent concrete raining over a small town close by. Now that's not safe at all. Even federal regulators got involved and started to ask questions about the impact of such launches. The blastoff also sent large bits of concrete and metal into a national wildlife refuge near Boca Chica Beach. On top of that, the worst bit, it ignited a 3.5-acre fire. So now, environmentalists want to stop SpaceX from launching any more aircraft. Look, here's the problem with all of that. Before the FAA granted a license to SpaceX, the environmental activists wanted a more extensive impact study. Anyway, that didn't work out to be the best for them. But now, these people want the facility to go through a full-scale review. And well, this would destroy the rocket company, furthermore setting back the development of Starship. And as a consequence, it would also complicate NASA's timeline. What's more, it would also stop the use of the spacecraft for Pentagon and commercial missions. So while Elon's company should be careful about all of this, the thing is, the activists need to calm down a bit too. This really would end up ruining humanity's mission to leave planet Earth. Now, that's not the only issue that SpaceX is facing. I'm sure you've heard about how the company's launches fail from time to time. You see, folks, there's no real system under the rocket that tries to send the exhaust in a direction. So what ends up happening is, there's a bunch of energy, and it's all being concentrated towards the ground, and all that energy is being dispersed together. They do, however, have a system called FireX. But all they're doing with this system is trying to create the kind of setting where explosions won't happen. It's kind of ineffective. At the end of the day, it's just a little bit of nitrogen that's mixed in with some misting water, which is nothing compared to the other systems. So other systems, such as the ones you might see on NASA's SLS, or even the Falcon 9, have massive deluge systems. A deluge system just passes out large quantities of liquid that can extinguish fire. Usually, it's just foam or water. But the thing is, it detects fire and disperses the liquid pretty darn quickly, making it super effective. Now, what ends up happening is that there's no oxygen for the fire to take in extinguishing it. Right, so the point of telling you all of that was the lack of a deluge system, and of course, the lack of tech that could divert the fire means that SpaceX doesn't control where all that energy will end up. I mean, that's kind of irresponsible at this point. Let's not forget, this is the most powerful rocket so far. So the energy went pretty much everywhere. And this is exactly why we saw massive chunks of concrete flying off left and right. That started a massive explosion. So, unless the company works on improving its system, chances are they'll continue to face these failures until they finally get it right. So from having a horrible, horrible launch system that can devastate everything around it, to the world's most powerful rocket bursting up in flames, this was what really happened in the recent SpaceX launch.